Welcome, welcome, everybody. We are tonight and next month will hopefully be the last two times we will be joining each other solely by Zoom. We're on Zoom tonight. We will be next month as well for a couple of reasons. And then at the beginning in September, we will be going to the Alta Club, barring some very unhappy circumstances, which I hope we hope we won't encounter. Do we have any guests with us who want to introduce themselves tonight?
Make a film.
Anybody? Okay. So I got a few announcements. As I just mentioned, we'll return to in-person get-togethers and presentations beginning in September. First night will be September 21st. We've got a fun program for that night. There is a celebration of the lives of the wonderful Barry and Marge Saunders, which has been postponed for months because of the pandemic. It's scheduled for July 31st. The information's in the newsletter, but it'll be at the U of U Museum of Natural History, South Terraces. Information about it is in the newsletter, and the Saunders daughters, Jennifer and Kristen, asked that we let them know if we're coming so they can be sure to have enough food. How's that? If you've been looking through the newsletters the past few months, you will know that we have nice bios of all our new members. We've got 5 or 6 new members over the last few months. Fun, interesting people who I fully expect will be wonderful contributing members of Utah Westerners for many years to come. For you new members, when you go to the Alta Club for the first time, you'll get a badge which will have your name on it, Utah Westerners. You don't get to keep it. We just leave it at the Alta Club. You pick it up as you go in, and that way everybody knows everybody's names, and it's a very nice thing. Unfortunately, we don't have nice sculpted skulls on the newer ones, but just is what it is. It'll be fun to get together. I hate to harp on payment of dues, but please pay your dues if you haven't to Craig Smith. We need dues to pay speakers, contribute to worthy causes. Just for your information, our latest contribution is for next summer's Railroads in Native America Symposium, which will be held next May in the Ogden Union Station. There are easy instructions in the newsletter on how to pay your dues if you have failed to, and you can also get a copy of the directory when you do. Speaking of the newsletter, I had a time today when I couldn't face legal issues any longer, and I spent an hour reading the newsletter, and it was the best hour I've spent in the history world for a long time. There are so many interesting, informative, fun matters referred to in there, links, many notes on tonight's film, a book review by Kurt Bench about Jim Dark's book, When Hollywood Came to Utah, which is now in its 3rd edition. You don't have a 4th one out yet, Jim, right? Just 3rd? Yeah, I'm sure there'll be a 4th someday. You come away enlightened by so many things, and Steve Berlin puts an extraordinary effort in and has an extraordinary product, which we can all be very thankful for. Also, speaking of the newsletter, there's a short survey in this month's for the board for some reactions by members, and so please take it. It won't take longer than a couple minutes. Watch for a coming mini field trip, which we hope to pull off in October. We've got a couple of possibilities we're discussing, but we'll firm that up and give everybody notice, and we'll spend a fun day, a day not long from now in a place not far from here, which will be in the grand tradition of the sort of mini field trips we have in the fall. I want to mention 2 things about Jim. I've already said that one of them is Kurt Bench's review of his book, which is very insightful. The first thing you ought to do is look at, read, the book because it is extraordinarily well done and informative and interesting and about films and TV shows filmed in Utah. It's a fun thing if you're interested in Utah, and I can't imagine that any of us are not. The other thing is that Brad Westwood's fabulous podcast, which is called Speak Your Piece, a podcast about Utah's history. Brad interviewed Jim about his book and movies in Utah when maybe a little over a year ago. That's available. We will put up on when we post when Steve Berlin posts the recording of tonight's Westerners, he will list that, a link to that interview of Brad an interview of Jim by Brad, which is really, really good. It goes without saying that Jim's notes that we've gotten 2 sets of so far about the movie Ramona were extraordinary, and hopefully you've already read them, and what we'll get is even deeper and more interesting stuff about tonight's movie. And with that, Jim, I turn the time. Are there any announcements that any of you have that you'd like to have heard by all the Westerners on the call? Okay, Jim, take it away.
Are we going to forego the intro?
Well, who was going to intro?
I am, of course.
Oh, I'm sorry, Kurt. I am so very sorry. I screwed up. Please, you're the right one to do it. So please,
well,
intro.
I guess I offered to pay the most to do it. So.
Well, I don't think so, but you're the one most qualified to introduce Jim, who can then introduce our film. Thanks. Okay. Thank you, Kurt.
You bet. Well, I've known Jim Dark for many years, and yet he wanted me to introduce him anyway. So I promised that I would leave all the bad stuff out, all the dark stuff, D''ARC. No, I'll leave those in. He said I think he's going to tell you he's beaming to us from Glendale, California, where he was born and raised. And he told me earlier that it's hotter than the inferno that Dante describes right now. I think we could give you a run for your money, though, Jim, up here, where there's something wrong when it's hotter in Salt Lake than it is St. George. But Glendale is, of course, on the east end of the San Fernando Valley. I was born on the west side, but I've never held it against Jim. Being born on the wrong side of the valley. But at any rate, I am grateful that I've been asked to introduce Jim Dark because he's one of the best, and I'll get into that. But he recently, I would say, in the last 4 years, retired from BYU. He earned a PhD in motion picture history. I think he got a history degree earlier there at the university. He taught courses in motion picture history for 30 years. And for over 40 years was the curator of the Arts and Communications Archive, the BYU Motion Picture Archive, and the BYU Film Music Archive. And until his retirement, he was, if I remember right, a senior librarian, longtime employee at the Harold B. Lee Library at BYU. He was instrumental in acquiring a number of collections of important film directors and stars, such as James Stewart, Lorraine Day, Howard Hawks, Cecil B. DeMille, I think Dean Jagger, and of course remember Dean Jagger from the film Brigham Young. That I hope that most of you were able to see Jim's special film presentations for the Utah Historical Society some while back, where he showed films and gave us commentary, and those were great. And one of them was Brigham Young. he's got quite a presence on the internet, and it's mostly good. It's all good. I learned some things about Jim that I didn't know, and unfortunately don't have time to go into them, but I just want to say that more on a personal note, those are some of his credentials that I gave you, but in the years that I've known Jim Dark, I found him to be a very bright, articulate, well-read, and I don't know if this is a term, well-watched. He's watched more films than I'll probably ever know about in my lifetime, and he's very professional. He's a good people person. He's a good listener. He cares about people. He pays attention, and he remembers. He remembers details that I soon forget, and remembers them in a good way and brings them up at appropriate times. He is not a dilettante. When he gets into a subject, he jumps in all the way and learns as much as he can learn. We recently had a discussion about a scientific principle or position, and it became clear that he had done a lot of research because he doesn't like to do anything halfway, and I think that's much to his credit. Not only is Jim a fellow cinephile, if that's a word, and bibliophile, which I know is a word because I use it all the time and I am one, but also a dear friend. And so really glad that Jim's going to talk to us tonight about Ramona, and especially because now that I'll be seeing the movie, I won't have to read the book. Take it away, Jim.
I try and not read the books too. I don't have time. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. And I am broadcasting from Glendale, California, La La Land. You know, this is the place that has invitational premieres, cocktail parties, meals that go late into the night, palm trees. So what did I do today? There are no invitational premieres because it's COVID. The lunches and meals, I had a burger and fries at Bob's Big Boy in Toluca Lake, just over the wall from Warner Brothers. That's about as far as I could get. And palm trees, do you really want those for a backdrop from me? It's 100 degrees out there. You're gonna get my hotel room because I'm right beside my air conditioner right now. But I am thrilled to be able to show you a long vanished movie, which is the earliest complete feature film that exists that was shot substantially in Utah in 1927 and then released in 1928. But I want to say something about how you're seeing this. Given its year, 1928, this is a silent film. Now, don't run away because you're in for a real treat. This is a good film, beautifully restored by the Library of Congress with its original color, tints, and tones. And, you know, as time goes on and people talk about movie history and they talk about silent movies, you think of these films that have jerky motions that go faster than real life dictates that they do. And you contrast that with talking pictures when movies grew up. Well, can I share some nuances there? Motion pictures started in the 1890s. And because sound technology had not been successfully developed to synchronize sound, talking, dialogue, and music, they sufficed with accompaniment on the piano, in cheap theaters, organs in a little better theaters, and then by the 1920s, huge Wurlitzer organs that would come up from the floor of the show house and dazzle the audiences. But initially, silent films were never silent. In the old Nickelodeon days, they would have a piano playing, not because it was aesthetically appropriate. It was to hide the clickety-clack of the very noisy projector that was more often than not in the same room as all of the viewers. But towards the end of the 19 teens and in the 1920s, these huge temples of the cinema, as they were called, were built in major cities. Here in Los Angeles, in New York City, Chicago, a few of them lovingly preserved to this day. And because the component of music was realized as probably 50% of the film experience. So silent pictures did something that sound pictures could not, and that is engage the audience in attention fully. Dialogue and sometimes descriptions of scenes was communicated by intertitles in a silent film, where you could read the lines of dialogue, or you could read the description of a scene. If you turned your head one way or the other, as you can do during sound movies, and you still know what's going on, in a silent film, you can't do that. You've got to pay attention. Your attention is riveted and you get into the picture. There is an emotion and a mysticism that occurs as you're wrapped in attention to what's going on the screen that allows you to interpret things the way you see them and have feelings that the quality of the score imparts to you that was lost by 1929 when the industry fully converted to all talking pictures. In fact, many audiences and many, many directors lamented the coming of sound for that very reason. There was a magic, a romanticism that was gone. Now, I'm not a complete Luddite. Sound to talking pictures benefited greatly. There was nuance, there were sounds that weren't available in silent film. So I don't mean to diss talking pictures in favor of silent. I'm just trying to emphasize what the differences are. And for Ramona tonight, you have the wonderful opportunity of experiencing a little bit of what it was like. Yes, they over emote because they feel like they're acting on stage to a distant audience. And yes, the music is lush, especially Blaine Gale's beautiful score that you're going to hear, including the title music to Ramona, which was a hit single in the 1920s and 30s and beyond. And you can't stereotype old movies as black and white versus color either, because as early as 1911, color was introduced to motion pictures in the form of tints and tones. The color, this cast put across the picture frame, could either give you a hint as to the time of day. Blue is night, amber or gold is day, or to emotion when you see red on the screen. There is either anger or romance if it's pink, all right? Audiences knew these cues and they enjoyed the color tints for the films of the teens and the 20s. And fortunately, Ramona has been restored fully because the print found in the Russian film archive of Ramona, one of two existing prints, as I explain in the program notes, had the original color, tints, and tones. And they were able to translate the intertitles from the Czech titles, because this was distributed to foreign countries where they could splice in or splice out the English intertitles and splice in the language of their own country. These Czech intertitles were translated with the help of an original publicity book that traveled with Ramona. So you are seeing it in near pristine condition. The added benefit tonight as well is you're seeing a great film photographed, at least 90 to 95% on all Utah locations within Zion National Park and Springdale. The only ones that I can recognize visually that may not have been is the attack on the Indian camp, which looked to me like the San Fernando Valley. And I think, though, that the sheep herding scenes were done at Cedar Breaks. Everything else was done at Zion National Park. The beautiful hacienda that was built in the grotto of the Temple of Sinahueva, where the current shuttle road up to the Zion Lodge goes up and then curves around and comes back. The hacienda that you will see in the film was built right where that curve is. No way, Jose, could a movie company get permission to do that now, at all. Then the cliffside cabin of our heroine, Ramona, and her husband, Alessandro, was built high up on the West Trail with great difficulty. They had to haul up all the logs to build that. And there are photographs extant, which I have in my book, of Dolores Del Rio, who plays Ramona, being carried up like Cleopatra with standard bearers and this wonderful perch that she's on, going up the West Trail so she could shoot her scenes up there with Warner Baxter as Alessandro. Well, I'm not going to spend any more time because you have the program notes, and I want to get you into the magic of this movie with intertitles and with Utah organist Blaine Gale's great score. So an additional reason I'm glad we're seeing this is those of you who are tethered to closed captions, like our beloved friend, Nelson Wadsworth, and possibly others, this is your night because the titles are in the film. So enjoy Ramona. And I think, Ken, are we having a brief Q&A afterwards? Do you want to do that or? Okay, we can do that afterwards. So I hope you'll enjoy the next hour and 21 minutes and lose yourself in the romanticism of Ramona.
Thanks, Jim.
Are we hooking into Richard Hale?
Wow.
Well, there you have it. Do you want me to begin now, Ken?
Yeah, please. Yeah. Anyone have questions? What an interesting movie.
I want to say one thing first. In all of my years of dealing with media, we hear that it's inert, it's unthinking, and Richard Hale is a professional at this, and I'm not, but I know enough to say that, doggone it, technology is anthropomorphic sometimes. It does have a life of its own, and I appreciate, Richard, you doing all you could to keep this afloat tonight. It made a real difference. I know how difficult technology can be. So thank you. Now, one thing I want to say a couple of things before the Q&A. And one is about the music and the effect that music has. And Blaine Gale's score was just wonderful. So I'm going to surprise you. I'm going to read you a comment from the French existentialist philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre. He remembered in his memoirs going to silent movies as a kid in France. And he wrote something that I think is as descriptive as can be about how significant the music in silent films was. And I quote him here. Above all, I like the incurable muteness of my heroes. But no, they weren't mute, since they knew how to make themselves understood. We communicated by means of music. It was the sound of their inner life. Persecuted innocents did better than really show or speak of suffering. It permeated me with its pain by means of the melody that issued from it. I would read the conversations, but I heard the hope and the bitterness. So how about that? You get entertainment tonight and you get French philosophy, existential philosophy. Now, the two other things I want to mention is what happened to our principal characters in the movie, Warner Baxter and Dolores Del Rio, after Ramona. Warner Baxter, think in your mind, how old do you think he was in this movie? He was 38 years old. He was a popular leading man. In fact, Ramona was released in 1928, and right after that was finished, he came back to Utah, to Grafton and Zion National Park, and made the first all-talking Western called In Old Arizona, directed by Raoul Walsh, and created the cinematic version of the Cisco Kid. And for that, in 1928, he got an Oscar, Best Actor. He returned again to do a sequel to In Old Arizona in Grafton called The Arizona Kid in 1930. And then after that, he did two more Cisco Kid movies, was directed by the likes of Cecil B. DeMille, Frank Capra, and John Ford before he slipped into B movies in the 1940s. He passed away in 1951 at age 62. Dolores Del Rio. Well, as I told you, Warner Baxter was 38, and he was playing with and against a 23-year-old young woman. She was discovered by the director of tonight's film, Edwin Carew, 3 years after this in Mexico. Brought her to the United States with her husband, Jaime Del Rio, starred her in 3 films, but Ramona turned out to be her breakout film. In fact, after the film was released, she was called by many the female Rudolph Valentino. And she went on to a great career in American movies, including The Bird of Paradise in 1932 with the great Joel McCrea, and Flying Down to Rio in 1933, a really great musical that paired a young dancing couple, Astaire and Rogers, for the very first time in this Busby Berkeley musical. Then she had a brief romance with Orson Welles that destroyed her marriage to director Edwin Carew, who discovered her and directed her in Ramona. And she returned to Mexico in 1942 and became the queen of Mexican cinema. And she ended up dying in 1983 at the age of 78. So interesting characters, interesting fates. The themes of tonight's movie, I dare say, would resonate more with audiences in the 21st century than they did in the 1920s. I mean, think of themes: race, identity, assimilation, prejudice. Those are emblazoned on today's headlines. The way that they were a different way in the 1920s. So Ramona still has some incredible relevance to this period of time in the 21st century. So, any comments or questions? And then Ken,
I have a comment.
you can close this off whenever you want, when the time.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, Jim.
Yes, Scott.
Comment along those lines. When I was in college at the University of Utah, I studied Native Americans, American Indian, and in our classroom, we talked in depth about Hollywood and prejudice. and racism. And I think most of the students in my class were Native Americans. And they made the comment that it always really, really, really bothered them that in movies, they were always portrayed by white men wearing wigs. And they thought it was a terrible injustice. And why couldn't Native Americans be portrayed by Native Americans? And, you know, today we're doing the exact same opposite. We're bringing race into everything, and we call it inclusion, just kind of mixing things up a little bit. So I was interested in your comment. Do you see racism enduring in the 20s and then kind of reversing itself in the 2020s?
Well, exactly. Remember, in the early 1920s, the tremendous amount of foreign immigration that started in the 1880s abruptly was ended by the American government in the early 1920s. And the spigot of immigration was essentially turned off at that time. And there was lynching. The Ku Klux Klan was revived again in the 1920s. So there was certainly enough racism to go around at that time because of the heavy immigration that had occurred before that time. However, in motion pictures, the criticism of those in your class is justified, because who wouldn't want those of that ethnic origin to play themselves in a movie? But here's the difficulty. In the 20s and to a great extent in the 30s and early 40s, acting is not easy. It takes experience and training to be convincing and to take direction in front of a camera. Frankly, there were very few Native Americans who could even do that. Now, Iron Eyes, remember him? Acted in movies in the 20s and 30s as a Native American, but very few people at the time knew he was born Italian at the time. So from directors John Ford and Henry Hathaway and George Martin, all the great Western directors, they cast Native Americans when they could. But it was very difficult to find Native Americans who could carry a lead role convincingly. So your classmates were right and Hollywood was right. Ramona, however, in terms of its story, was very progressive in its treatment towards Native Americans. And one might say they got a little closer to it by casting a Native Mexican woman to play the part of a Native American or a mestizo, a mixed race. Not much excuse for Warner Alexander. Or Warner Baxter, he was as far from being a Native American as anyone could have been. But as I say, that was the norm for that period of time. So there's a mixed answer to the question, but a good question nevertheless.
Jim, thank you so much for bringing us something wonderful that we didn't know about, at least most of us, and tell us your
welcome.
Background on it. And Dolores Del Rio is more beautiful than I could imagine. She is stunning. And but it was a sweet, sensitive, beautiful film, a tragedy. And, thank you so much.
Yeah, it's a downer, isn't it?
Thanks to Richard Hale. Richard Hale was there, and once things got going, it was smooth as silk from there on. Richard Hale's help. Without him, we'd have been stuck.
We know,
Right.
absolutely. Thank you,
Yeah.
Richard. Jim, what kind of accent did she have when she actually turned to the talking movies? Dolores Del Rio.
Repeat that again.
Did she have a heavy accent? Did she speak English well? Was it?
She spoke English very, very well because she came, Edwin Carew brought her to the United States in the early 1920s. So she had an opportunity to learn English well. And if you see those two films, The Bird of Paradise from 1932 and, what was the other one I mentioned? Bird of Paradise. Oh, and Flying Down to Rio with Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. She did very, very well.
Yeah.
And performed very, very well. But I think the romance with Orson Welles did it for her. We know of Orson Welles as a very impulsive, phlegmatic man with a very magnetic personality. And I think by then she was done with Hollywood.
Huh.
And went right back to Mexico. And you would think she would go into obscurity. But as I mentioned earlier, she became the hit female performer in Mexican cinema during its golden age in the early 1940s and did very, very well.
What movies was Orson Welles making when she was living with him?
Well, Citizen Kane was one of them.
Yeah.
His first big one. And then they continued seeing one another from probably 1940 to 1942 when she left.
Yeah. How interesting.
I'm convinced she would have been a really top draw had she stayed in the United States and continued in film, because as Joe pointed out, she was quite a beauty. And as they say in the business, the camera really loved her. And how those locations.
Berlin, I really enjoyed this, and I was struck by a number of things. I mean, the story's terrific and surprising, but quite a bit about the movie making, the length of the scenes and so on, and the way it's cut and edited reminds me of modern times. Then the other thing I wondered, has anybody ever used a lip reader to try to see what was being said?
You know, good question, Jack. Viewers of silent films of the day would often write to the movie companies and would say, hey, wait a minute. The intertitle dialogue doesn't match what they were saying. In fact, they were cursing. Very soon, the movie companies got the idea, you just can't say anything on the screen. You've got to say what the titles are saying, so we don't get heat from viewers anymore. And that quickly stopped. They got caught too many times.
Well, this has been really fun and interesting, and we so appreciate your commentary and your finding these movies. And that, you know, it was interesting to see that the tint, you know, when the Marauders are killing all the Native Americans in the village, it's all red. I mean, that, you know, I had never. Was that commonplace in silent movies?
Yes. In fact, in the 1925 version, I think the best version of the Phantom of the Rue Morgue, colored tints are used frequently. And when the Phantom comes down the stairs in that flamboyant costume of his, they actually did two-strip Technicolor, to where it wasn't just a tint, it was actual color pigment that defined the costumes and the sets. But that was only for about 3 minutes in the film. And then they went back to doing the tints and tones because that was the expectation of the audience. That's what they were used to seeing. And Technicolor wasn't that advanced at that point in time to do an entire feature. Very expensive.
Jim, yeah, I liked the color, and I thought about that a little and realized you couldn't just make a print. That would be black and white. You'd have to make the portions you wanted the different colors, print that separately, and then, you know, put that into the whatever you distributed.
Well, Craig, you've opened up the door of the nuts and bolts of movie making. In order to get the different tints, they would take the separate scenes and put them in the wash or the bath to give them that tint, to impregnate the film with that tint, each print. And then it would be cut into the film in order to do it that way. Quite laborious.
Wow. is fun in and of itself. I mean, what a cool thing. It'd be fun. Is that early movie from Southern Utah? Was that Stagecoach? Is there an early Lost? There's a famous early movie that nobody's ever found a print of.
Oh yes. That was filmed in Kane County near Kanab in 1924. And that was the first significant Hollywood feature film. And it starred Tom Mix, called The Deadwood Coach. That also was filmed in Zions, as well as in Bryce and in the Grand Canyon. And the only surviving still photographs from that lost film I published in my book.
Huh.
So you get an idea of how grand that movie must be. And to date, unlike Ramona, no one has ever come across a 35 millimeter film copy of The Deadwood Coach from 1924.
Right.
That would be the next major discovery.
Did Tom Mix have a famous dog or a famous horse, or didn't he have some?
He had a famous horse.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tony.
Yeah.
And an elderly couple, almost in their 90s, who I interviewed in Springdale, the Rooshes, remembered going up and seeing Tom Mix film the movie in the park. And Tom Mix wanted to borrow Mr. Rooshe's horse, and he wouldn't let him do it because he wasn't sure what he was going to do with his horse. And I have a picture in my book of Tom Mix with this young Walter Roosh and his buddies all lined up in a picture in Springdale. And to sit there with him in his home right by the river, the Virgin River, he talked in a way and described the experience as if we were there at that moment. So he was one of the last witnesses who could attest to the fact that that movie was filmed there and in specific areas. And now most of the people I interviewed for the book are now gone. There's the picture. Thank you. There's the picture.
Good job, Doug.
At the gateway to Zion National Park. And Tom Mix was the John Wayne of the 1920s. I mean, everybody idolized him. He was big, and it was a big deal when he came to Utah to film that movie. So it's too bad that's a lost film.
Yeah.
Thanks, Doug.
Anything else?
Yeah, I look forward to next year. Maybe
let's find another good
Arizona with the Cisco Kid. See Warner Baxter's Oscar-winning performance and see a lot of Grafton in there.
Well, and hopefully we'll be back live, so copyright will be less of an issue than it's been with these last 2 years. Is that right?
And we can see it together on the big screen.
Great.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Good to be with you.
Thanks everybody who was able to pull this off. Let me just make one note before we break. Thanks for everyone for coming. I want to let you know that next week our speaker, it's going to be our last fully Zoom meeting for several reasons. But Matt Harris, who's a history professor at Colorado State University and author of the recently published Watchman on the Tower, Ezra Taft Benson and the Making of the Mormon Rite, is going to come talk about the controversial LDS church leader and Secretary of Agriculture under Dwight Eisenhower. So that's who we're gonna listen to next month. Mark August 17th on your calendars. Thank you for everyone who's put this together. Thank you especially to Jim. Thanks to Kurt for everything. Thanks to Scott for the great newsletter. You're all great, and it's wonderful to meet online. It'll be much better to meet in person soon. So let's give Jim a big hand.
Night. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you. Thank you, Kurt. Thank you all. Without an audience, there's no movie. Thanks.
Good point.
Good night.
Thanks all. See
Good
ya.
night.